So in spite of a few things turning out like duds the way I did not expect them to in the form of Samurai Jack and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, 2017 also continues to be a year of very pleasant surprises. First with Lego Batman, then Logan, then even kind of the King Arthur movie, and now even Wonder Woman. Yes, this is one of those instances where I wholeheartedly agree with what a lot of people are saying about the film. It just fucking works, is kind of the way I want to sum it up. And I know that's a really stupid way to try and review quote-unquote a film, but this is like one of those instances such as Star Trek Beyond, where the movie just works on so many different levels that it's kind of even pointless to talk about why it works. It feels like one of those things that's just that you'll understand if you pay attention to the film. You'll just see why it works, and then it's just going to be kind of pointless for me to even try to explain it. And kind of because of that whole element and the fact that I agree with so many other reviewers, I'm not going to do this as a standard review of the film. Rather, I'm going to talk about the big prevailing message of the film in a kind of analytical point of view. And that's kind of the reason why Wonder Woman has struck such a chord with me, because it managed to succeed at making me feel something about a superhero property that I've never really felt before, and I'll explain later why. But for those of you who want kind of like a short non-spoiler review from yours truly, basically a lot of the things that people talk about the film are really, really true. A lot of the positive ones, like Gal Gadot. Like, despite the fact that she has still some rough edges when it comes to the acting side of things, she's incredibly charismatic. She has a lot of really surprising range. The movie demands quite a lot of things from her. It expects her to kind of juggle a wide variety of emotions, from pure shock to despair, to pure anger, to childish naivete, great curiosity, great humor. She's just able to juggle all of these various different elements and facets of the character with relative ease. And there are very few scenes where I feel like she's not being able to match up to kind of like the acting that she should have. There are some scenes like that where you can kind of tell she's not really there yet. But for her first movie where she actually has a lot of material to work with, genuine material, this is absolutely fantastic work from the side of her. And I don't know if this is going to like make her career, if she's just going to be one of those stars who's just always going to be kind of remembered as Wonder Woman, and she's never going to be able to find another role as iconic or as important as this. But regardless, she has kind of left her mark on history, and it's a very, very important and very positive one to boot. Chris Pine as Steve Trevor is probably one of the best supporting characters that's ever existed in a comic book movie, and probably a comic book story, because a lot of the time when you have like these partner characters or even love interests in these comic book movies, they never really feel super integral to the storyline. It very often feels like if you just took these people out, yeah, you'll lose the romance. Yeah, you might lose like a cool buddy for the protagonist to like talk to, but it never really feels like they're integral to the development of the protagonist, that they don't further a lot of the themes of the movie quite in the way Steve Trevor does. And Steve Trevor is capable of being a really strong character in his own right, being in many ways the equal and even superior to Wonder Woman in this story, as well as being part of a really compelling love story that pretty much shits on anything else that everybody else is doing. Like, there is no romance, I think, in any comic book movie that's done quite to the level that this manages to do it. Not from the older DC flicks, not from any of the various Marvel franchises that are going on right now. It's just really, really expertly handled. And the fact that you have the love interest and, you know, like the protagonist's buddy all rolled into one with Steve Trevor, and the fact that he is able to stand out so much as a strong character in his own right is absolutely fantastic. Like, this is kind of like the gold standard you want to have for not just your love interests, but also for your big like supporting characters. Like, Falcon is kind of cool, but Falcon does not even approach what they do with Steve Trevor in this movie. And I'll explain later on when I get to the big message of the film. And then, of course, I also really appreciate the fact that this is an actual war story. Like, the setting of World War I is used to great effect, which I will also explain later on. There's an actual point to this movie being set in World War I. It also feels like an actual war movie, whereas Captain America: The First Avenger is a really fun flick. It's a cool introduction to Captain America, but it doesn't really feel like a World War II movie. And it really feels like the movie itself is capitalizing on the World War setting to like do anything with the Steve Rogers character. They just pluck him in and then they just have a fun adventure with him, but it never really feels like a true war. Whereas the Wonder Woman movie, much to its credit, does not shy away from basically going to some darker places and using the World War I setting for some really heartfelt scenes, some real dramatic ones, for some great action set pieces. It's just a fantastic justification for putting her in this kind of environment as her starting point, and it really works with the overall themes of the movie. Ares, once again, I'm going to have to kind of explain this later on in the video, but Ares, this is probably the best version of him that I've ever seen, because Ares, in a lot of media, he is either really, really boring, really, really generic, and he just doesn't work, or if they do make him interesting, they have to do it at the expense of him being an antagonist. Greg Rucka's New Rebirth run and Brian Azzarello's Wonder Woman run, they managed to make Ares kind of an interesting character, but at the expense of him being an antagonist. Like, you cannot have those versions of Ares be big enemies to Diana or antagonistic forces to Diana, because it just wouldn't work. And this movie actually manages to keep Ares kind of both interesting, like thematically new and character-wise, but they also manage to make him like a worthy adversary for Diana. Like, this might be the best version of Ares I've ever seen. Even though a lot of people are kind of down on Ares, they kind of expect him to be a bit more, they expected him to be like fucking Kratos, or for him to be like Ares from like the God of War games, where he's just, you know, really big, strong, and evil and generic, because fuck comic book fans. Seriously, fuck these people. But anyway, he is kind of like the X-24 of the movie, where he's not super great as his own character, but as a thematic plot device who serves as kind of like the big foil to Diana and one of the big thematic counterpoints to Diana. He really, really works, and he's very much an integral part of the story. So this movie just fucking works, okay? This movie is really, really good. I had a blast watching it. Like, much like Logan, this movie actually managed to bring me like to the edge of tears. Like, I cannot believe that a comic book movie like this was able to make me feel as much as it did. I was sure that nothing would ever manage to like catch up to Logan and kind of like Dark Knight Rises in that regard. But Wonder Woman is one of those movies, and it is very much a special experience. But now I'm going to get to the reason why I think it is specifically a really special experience. But to do that, I'm going to have to spoil the shit out of the movie. So for those of you who have seen the movie, and you don't care about spoilers, obviously, or if you're someone who hasn't seen the movie and you just want to hear me kind of like be philosophical or pseudo-philosophical or any of that bullshit for a little while, you can, of course, keep watching the video. But if you're someone who hasn't seen the movie and you don't want to be spoiled, you've majoritively gotten my spoiler-less review for the movie. It's really, really good. It's a fantastic time. It's probably the best origin movie since Batman Begins, and honestly, I have to see this a couple more times, but I wouldn't be surprised if this movie ended up being in like one of my top 10 favorite comic book movies of all time. I genuinely think it could potentially be really, really that good. So yeah, for those of you who are listening in, who are at least staying on, I assume you have already seen the film and you don't care about spoilers, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty. So, a couple weeks ago I read Infinite Crisis. And Infinite Crisis is a complicated story, but it was basically a 2005 to 2006 event by Geoff Johns and Phil Jimenez, and it was kind of all about the old multiverse coming back. And it was kind of a clash between the classical DC of the pre-Crisis on Infinite Earth era and also the modern DC universe, at least modern at the time of 2005. And you'll know that DC back in the good old days was a lot different than the DC we have now. Whereas comic books were very much simple back in that day, where the characters had very simple mentalities. They were very, one or two dimensional. The world around them wasn't a very complicated place. And if a complicated issue did, manage to slip on through, it was handled with kind of like the same logic that anything else was back at that time. And the heroes were very much pure. They were very innocent. They were, very much paragons of virtue in spite of everything else. and their mentalities won over above everything else. Whereas the current Earth of the DC universe was at the time a world where, Wonder Woman snapped Maxwell Lord's neck, Superman had died, Batman had gotten his neck broken, he had created, Tower of Babel happened, Identity Crisis happened, and it was very much a world where the heroes were very much in a gray area, where the big simplistic moralities of, the 60s, the 50s, and the 70s, and even kind of the 80s were all very much vanishing, and the characters had gotten substantially darker, they had gotten much more morally gray, as I already said, and these two versions of the DC Universe came into a clash. And unlike what most comic book stories would do, it presented a very balanced discussion on the whole matter, because both of these versions of DC had their pros and their cons. In Earth 2, for that time, it is okay, to be optimistic, for you to truly believe in the whole righteousness of people, but that doesn't work in the real world. You cannot think like Golden Age Superman from Earth 2 back in the good old days. You cannot apply that mentality here, because all you're going to do is become a self-righteous douchebag who thinks that his way of thinking is right, and you might inadvertently cause a lot of damage, a lot of pain, a lot of grief in what you think is the right thing to do. And in the real world, in the world that we live in right now, that mentality just cannot work by itself. You have to be more flexible. And on the flip side, you had modern DC Universe, where it was very much based on mistrust. It was very much darker. The characters were much more lenient on becoming more morally gray than they were back in the good old days. But that was also kind of presented as a bad thing, but also kind of like a good thing, because the modern world is a very complex place, and you can't just trust that Superman is always going to stay good, that he's never going to be brainwashed permanently and could potentially destroy the entire planet. You need to have contingencies for that. And Wonder Woman, the movie, finally, to get back to the film itself, is a movie that perfectly recaptures the message of Infinite Crisis. And that's a message that I can actually get behind. And the message is, the world is a very complicated place. Humanity is not broken because some omnipotent god figures corrupted us or because they made us this way. We are just complicated creatures with the capacity to create great good things, but also great evil. And in that kind of a world that is built by inherently flawed people, you have a lot of complexities. You have situations where doing the bad thing might cause a lot of good things to happen, or where doing the right thing could screw you over or could inadvertently screw somebody else over. And you have to accept that fact. You cannot just live in this idyllic, naive worldview where everything can be solved by just punching the bad guy. And if you punch the bad guy hard enough, people are immediately going to become unselfish. They're going to love one another. They're never going to be greedy or angry or warmongering. Everything's just going to become great if you punch the bad guy enough times in the face. And that's the mentality that Diana has throughout the entire film. Her optimism is very much well-founded, and her desire to do the right thing is very much inspirational. But Diana, throughout the entire film, she thinks that Ares corrupted mankind, and if she can kill Ares, if she can stop him, Ares' influence on mankind will stop, and everybody is going to go back to being good and nice to one another. But then, as we see in the film itself and in events that follow on the film, what Steve Trevor tells her after she kills Ludendorff, believing that she's Ares, he pretty much verbalizes what I just said, that maybe it's not Ares, maybe it's not some kind of omnipotent magical bad guy making us bad. Maybe we're just, complicated people on our own, and some of us are good, some of us are bad, some of us are bad people who do good things for our own reasons, some of us are good people who do bad things also for our own reasons. And you can't just expect to beat the evil bad guy and then just fix all the problems of the world. And this is kind of what sets off a lot of Diana's character development, and that's very much the overall message of the movie and what Diana learns from her experiences in World War I and remembering them in the present after the events of Batman v Superman, where, once again, another kind of figure who was starting to realize the complexities of the world, he sacrificed himself for a world that hated and loathed and distrusted him, and he was willing to die for them anyway to save them from another Kryptonian destruction. And Diana basically learns that lesson that I just talked about, that you have to acknowledge the fact that people are capable of great good and great evil, but you should always strive for the better. You should always strive to fight for the good in yourself and for the good of other people, but you should always keep a perspective on the evil people are capable of doing to one another, or else you're just going to become a self-righteous, naive moron who the world is going to break apart when punching the bad guy enough times in the face doesn't magically fix everything. And this is very much where Trevor and Ares become integral parts of the story, because Trevor is, like I said, he is in many ways superior to Diana psychologically, because Steve Trevor is a dude who grew up in the real world. He's the guy who's fought in World War I. He's seen how messy and pointless war can be, and he's been a spy, so he's had to do a lot of questionable shit that other soldiers, even in World War I, probably didn't have to do. But he still has a really strong moral center. He is very much the guy who knows that people are capable of great evil and great good simultaneously, and he's always the guy who fights for the good. In fact, one of the most telling things about Steve Trevor is when we realize his backstory, where as a spy he witnessed the capabilities of Dr. Poison's gas, and he goes against his orders. He was just supposed to be a dude who observed things from the sidelines, but when he saw the destructive capability of this weapon, Steve Trevor could not just sit back and act. He had to find a way to stall the production of this thing so that World War I could actually stop finally, and this killing could stop. And so he is very much that character. He is very much that person who has had to do a lot of bad things. He's had to obviously kill people. He has to lie to people, cheat and manipulate people for the greater good. But he always understands what he's fighting for, and he is always fighting for the right thing in spite of the other less than noble things he's had to do. And the next counterpoint to this whole discussion comes in the form of Ares. And the reason why Ares is really, really damn good in this movie is because Ares is not just doing war to feed himself. He's not just there to make mankind destroy one another because he's lol evil, their god of war, and he feeds off of war, and he needs it for power, just for power's sake. In fact, it's very dubious if Ares even is the god of war, because throughout the entire film, Ares never feeds off of the energy of war. So war itself is not tied to Ares whatsoever. He does not draw his power from it. And after the end of this film, World War II happens, Vietnam happens, the Korean War happens, the Cold War happens, the Kryptonians invade. A lot of things happen completely without Ares' intervention whatsoever that pretty much prove that war is something that humanity is capable of all on their own, completely independent of Ares, and Ares does not depend on their fighting to have any kind of power. In fact, Ares in this movie is kind of like a combination of God and Satan from that story where God and Satan make a bet where God is just going to make a believer's life miserable. He's going to kill his family, burn down his house. He's going to destroy this dude's life just to test out how good this believer in him is, and to see if he truly does believe in God in spite of everything else that happens. And Ares is kind of like that, where Ares very early on recognized mankind's evil, their capacity for selfishness, for self-destruction, for destroying one another, their greed, their arrogance. And Ares, throughout history, he has always given mankind the tools to advance themselves forward, and he never forces them to do anything. Ares just kind of whispers in their ear, here is the means of doing this. What you do with that tool I just gave you is completely up to you. Do you want to use this gas as a means of warfare, or do you want to use it maybe as like a form of medicine? Maybe you can use this as a way to help people who are physically frail, to make them stronger, or to heal people, or to do any other number of things. And anytime he has done this, humanity has seemingly always used the tools he kind of whispers in their ear for warfare. And this is kind of the game that Ares plays with mankind, where he is always trying to prove to himself, seemingly, that mankind, if you give them the means, they will always resort to war. War, destruction, death, and murder. That is the standard default for mankind. They are all bad and they all deserve to die. And Ares is actually ironically he's trying to kind of like restore Eden, where he's like always nudging mankind along so they destroy themselves. And when mankind is completely wiped off the face of the map, Ares will basically, help restore the world, create paradise again before man tainted it with what Ares perceives as their evil corruption. And so Ares, the guy who is typically associated as the god of war, is pretty much always fighting kind of in the pursuit of an Eden-esque peace. And Ares is kind of like the logical endpoint for Batman from Batman v Superman, where he is so devoured by mankind's cynicism. He is so devoured by all the evil mankind can do. He is so focused, so singularly focused on just what mankind can do on the bad spectrum, that he completely ignores the fact that mankind is capable of great good, that they're capable of getting rid of old grudges, old rivalries, to fight together, to live together in harmony and peace, and they're capable of great things. And he is very much stuck in a sort of tunnel vision, much like Diana is for a large majority of the movie. And thanks to that kind of contrast between him and Diana and what Steve Trevor tells Diana, Diana is able to get a fully three-dimensional perspective on the entire world at the end of this movie, and to get that message that I talked about beforehand across, that whole message of knowing that mankind is capable of a lot of different things, good and bad, always striving towards the good for yourself and for other people, but accepting the fact that evil is always present, that evil can screw you over, that just because if you do the right thing doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be rewarded for it, and the fact that you can never win, because mankind is probably never going to reach the imaginary enlightenment we all think they will, but that doesn't make the pursuit of that enlightenment, that constant pursuit of trying to be better, trying to always strive towards being better, that doesn't make it any more pointless. Because if we just quit, and if we just become like Ares, where we just think everything is shitty, everything deserves to die, then humanity will actually die out, because we will become so cynical, so amoral, and so destructive that we could potentially completely kill each other and leave nothing left behind of ourselves that we've built along. And this is kind of why Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor both are very much inspirational figures in the movie for me, because a lot of the time superhero fiction has this really obnoxious thing where Superman believes wholeheartedly, two-dimensionally, that everybody is good. As long as you're good and righteous and virtuous, everything's going to be good, and if you act good, the world will always reward you. You will always be able to win out. And that's kind of the reason why I've never been able to really get inspired by the likes of Superman or Batman or even Wonder Woman or Captain America or a lot of other so-called inspirational heroes, because so many times is their ideologies, their ways of thinking are so tunnel vision, so limited, so overly simplified, and the way the stories are inorganically forced to surrender to these ridiculously simple and cartoonish mentalities is why I've never really been inspired by superheroes. Because if you try to act like fucking All-Star Superman, you will either destroy yourself or the world will destroy you. You cannot think like that guy and actually apply that to yourself and actually turn out okay in the world, because either you're going to fuck yourself up or the world around you is going to fuck you up instead. But the Wonder Woman movie gives an actual balanced view of the world, a message you can actually apply to yourself and the rest of mankind, and it can actually fucking work. And so this is actually probably one of the few instances where a superhero property has given a balanced, well-researched, well-delivered message on the pros and cons of mankind, and how superheroes themselves always strive towards doing the better, even if they can never win. And it does it so expertly. It does it in such a great way through various different characters, and it never beats you over the head with it. It's all really, really great stuff. And for that reason alone, the Wonder Woman movie is something special. It is one of the rare pieces of comic book medium where it gives you an inspirational figure who actually has something you can realistically apply to yourself and the world around you, and it'll actually probably turn out okay if you try to apply it. So yeah, that's kind of my analysis of the big message of Wonder Woman. I know this is a pretty big, long, pretty obtuse video, but there's a lot to talk about with this movie, and I think that a lot of people aren't really getting this message across. I feel like a lot of people aren't really getting what the movie was going for. I've seen a lot of reviews that say that Wonder Woman should have just punched out the bad guy and won World War I like that. And when I see stuff like that, I just feel like they're completely missing what the movie is trying to say and what it's talking about. And so far, nobody seems to have done anything even approaching like a deeper analysis of the film. And I feel like this is a message of the movie itself that deserves its day in the spotlight. And I'm glad that I was able to really give it that spotlight and share it with all of you guys. So yeah, what did you think about Wonder Woman? Do you think I'm just making shit up about the message of the movie? Do you think I'm just fucking crazy, making stuff up that isn't there? Or do you agree with me in the fact that Wonder Woman actually does have an actually mature, fairly balanced kind of message for its audience and for its characters? So yeah, guys, please comment down below, and I'll probably see you next time. Bye.